ready to get started. I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning. We're going to let each of the legislators have about 1 or 2 minutes to tell you a few things that they're doing. And I did want to let you know that I did hear this morning that Dale Helmrich is very ill. If we'd like to keep him in our prayers, please. He's very ill. And he's always been a great person to come to these meetings and a great supporter of issues for the elderly. So please keep him in your prayers. Okay, Dave, you're still eating.
I'll go last.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Danny, why don't you go ahead and take just 1 to 2 minutes here.
I got a stopwatch.
There, Dave. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good to be here. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your schedule for coming out on this Saturday morning. Look forward most of all to your questions. That's why we're going to be very brief here this morning in our opening remarks. The biggest thing that we've done in the House, just to highlight what we've done in the House over the last couple of weeks, the biggest thing that we've done is pass the budget out of the House. And we did that. We passed the budget. We were able to do that. It was a long party line vote, 51 to 49 out of the House of Representatives. And the big factor in it was a funding increase for education. Most folks were in agreement that we would not be able to do that, pass a budget out that provided for increases in education. I'm happy to say that we did. A 1.75 minimum guarantee for education, K through 12, a 2% average increase, and a 3% maximum increase. So about a 2% average increase for all K through 12 education. Another thing that we were able to do, we provided bonding projects, bonding authority for most of our institutions of higher education, and the benefits of that are twofold. First of all, it's going toward building new buildings, new classrooms, new libraries for our institutions of higher education. And secondly, it is our hope that that will stimulate the economy, because one of the end results of that is more jobs. So that is another highlight of the budget bill. Another thing, the budget that we passed took some money out of the Tobacco Trust Fund, borrowed some money out of that, took some out of the Pension Stabilization Fund, and unfortunately there had to be cuts, so we flatlined the Medicaid budget. And I know that that's going to raise the ire of some folks, but in this situation that we had this year, there had to be tough decisions made, and everyone was in agreement that we needed to address education. That's it for the budget. And also on Thursday, we passed the Orange County Casino bill, and it got 84 votes, and that's very big coming out of the House of Representatives. It passed 84 to 13. Representative Stillwell.
Thank you, Representative Oxley. 2 minutes and 15 seconds into your 1-minute comment. The focus in the House, and someone asked me about a Senate bill, and we don't even know that there's Senate bills really, and it almost works that way till they come over, and we'll visit those and after next Tuesday. It was really pretty historic. The budget bill came, maybe 10 days ago, and it came out, and it's difficult, and you have to understand there's probably lots of folks on both sides of the aisle that like this and don't like this, but it was a party line vote. And the one thing it didn't do, because I don't think that the folks in Indiana it didn't raise taxes, and we had a big gap to fill, and we had to go out and look at some innovative ways to do that. And clearly, education. If you flatline education, you're really cutting it about 3% across the board because of the increased growth within their things, and it did do that there. The prison population, it's a growing population, and there's proposals for new prisons because we like to be tough on crime over here. And when you are, you got to find facilities to put the folks in the prisons, and we knocked out some new prisons, and in fact there's other things in there for things, home detention and other issues that we're looking at so that we can reduce those. These are multi-billion-dollar budgets for this year, so we can reduce that and look at other ways of incarceration that cost tax, that does the same purpose for nonviolent crimes, and that we also have the ability so we're not spending billions of taxpayers' dollars for new prisons. Next week, is the last of the House bills. If the bill isn't on the calendar, it's not going to happen next week. Second and third readings, that means we're going to get done around midnight on Tuesday evening. The two big issues yet to come is called Energize Indiana. I suspect many of you know about that, and that's the governor's proposal for economic stimulus. Minutes a minute, Davey.
You're almost there.
There you go. Energize Indiana, and that's a stimulus. That's a stimulus program for the state of Indiana that Joe Kernan and Frank O'Bannon has been promoting for about 9 months now, and we're going to be debating that. It's mostly encompassed in about 3 or 4 bills in the House bills, and we're optimistic that we'll get a bipartisan support on that, but we don't know, and we hope we do because we think that will stimulate the economy and research and development credits and many other things through the course of the next 10 years. It's a 10-year program. With that, Lindell, you get the Senate 2-minute baton drill.
Since I'm in the Senate, we have half as many members. I suppose I only get a minute. Is that what you're telling me? I too want to thank you for being here and thank the Chamber for making these arrangements. I think it's always very positive that we do get the chance to hear from you, and glad to see that you've shown up. The work that's been going on in the Senate, and of course we can't really work on the budget, and we can't work on taxes or those kind of things until after it comes from the House and then comes to the Senate. So most of the really important legislation that's going to be affecting everyone in this state is coming out of the House of Representatives. And I have to commend the House Democrats for putting together a budget that is a balanced budget that meets the needs. And there are going to be some areas in there that we're going to have some changes, I'm sure, in the Senate. I'm already hearing from the Republicans that they're wanting to look at cutting education, perhaps doing away with that minimum guarantee, which is going to really, I think, be the worst thing that we could possibly do. When we only look at a 1.75% minimum guarantee, we're in fact looking at a cut in funding of education. And I don't believe at this time, when we're looking at trying to build the economy of this state, try to make this state even more competitive than we are today, we cannot cut education either on the K through 12 level or higher education. We need to be looking at increased funding. And I was very pleased to see in the budget that the House Democrats did approve all of the construction contracts that or construction projects that are in the that are on the higher education list. These are things that are needed. They're needed to provide the space for more children coming into higher education, and it's very important that we do that. And to put it off is wrong. One of the things that I think that we're going to be talking about the Democratic caucus in the Senate is, do we have to not look at some type of revenue-raising measures? One of the things that occurs to me as I talk to people who say, how did we get into this budget situation? You had a $2 billion surplus. And where did it go? Well, you know where it went. We've talked about it time and time and time again. It went through tax cuts that we gave back in 1999. We had a finite amount of money, $2 billion, and we gave out an infinite amount in long-term tax reductions. We need to go back and revisit that. Not to change anything that we did in the special session last year to restructure taxes, but go back and look at what we did in 1999 that obviously was not even noticed by the tax-paying public, but it's costing this state a lot of money, and we need to be looking at some of these things that might bring in some additional revenue so we could fund education, and we could also at the same time fund Medicaid, because I think it's, as Russ and Denny have said, I think there are going to be some real concerns about funding of Medicaid. We can't cut that funding, and I know that they've had to do it. They've had to look at ways that they could do it. But if we can find some additional revenue that's not going to be too painful, so that we can get through this period. And mind you, this is not just Indiana. Virtually every state in the nation is facing the same kind of problems that we are, and many of them are worse. There's, I understand, $80 billion deficit in states throughout the nation, and that is the worst deficit situation that the states have had since World War II. The economy is not strong enough to support the revenues to the states. We've got to look at ways that we can maintain our services and continue to provide those services without dramatic tax increases. But it's really going to be difficult. But I think we ought to at least revisit some of these things that we did.
Lyndall's approaching 5 minutes, so I don't get to talk now. So, no. Thank you. Glad to be here with you this morning. The post-game show went a little long at the Washington Elks last night following another hatchet victory. And for those of you that don't know, I broadcast the Washington games on my new radio station up there. And Mike Davis, the IU head coach, snuck into the game last night right after tip-off. And of course, we figured out he was there, and he actually was gracious enough to be on my halftime show, and about 175 kids followed him to the broadcast booth, and he signed autographs for every kid there, it seemed like. But they finally moved him to the floor to keep everybody away from him after the second half started. The budget, obviously, is the big topic. Even though we've moved that bill to the Senate, it's still a work in progress, as most any bill is at this point, because there's going to be a lot of changes for any legislation that's been proposed at this point as it keeps moving through the process. I think we've kind of given this budget mess to the Senate and say, hey, you guys take a shot at it. And there's all this optimism that if the next 2 months of revenue projections are positive, that might make it easier to think that we're on the rebound from an economy standpoint. But when you look at this rough winter we've had the last month especially, and the fact that I talked to a lot of retailers who are really struggling right now with poor sales, I'm not too optimistic the next 2 months of revenue projections will be positive enough to make us think that we're coming out of this recession, which might mean real problems as we try to craft a final budget by the end of April. I sure hope we don't go to a special session, but I think the reality that we all have to accept is that if we don't find a way to protect public education with a modest increase and take care of basic services, and that might mean a tax increase, which no one at least wants to admit or even support at this point. It's either figure out a way to fund it from the state level, or guys like Superintendent Yost and others are just going to have to find ways to raise it locally. And obviously we're trying to do what we can to keep from seeing dramatic increases in your local property taxes. So it's still a tough balancing act to walk at this point, and it'll be interesting to see how things play out toward the latter part of April, and I'm sure my 2 minutes are up, so we'll take your questions.
Well, your first 30 seconds were commercials.
Thank you. By the way, Paul, it's 107.9 for my good friend Paul Denise.
What do they call it?
WAMW, Reds Baseball Network. There you go. For you Reds fans.
I did want to say something else, so we'll put another commercial in for Paul, though. He does have this being taped for the TV station UPN 27. It will be on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. For those of you who want to watch it again, or those people who couldn't be here. So.
It will be edited.
Rich, do you have
Dave, Du Bois County has a lot of interest in this bill going for the casino supposedly at West Baden French Lake.
Right.
I understand from rumors this morning you changed some of this funding around and you put some restrictions on it. Tell me what your intentions were and what you did.
I like to pass to majority whip at this point. That's a joke. Denny's the majority whip. For the percentage that Du Bois County would receive, trying to figure out a fair way to distribute the dollars that would come from the West Baden French Lick Casino if that ever becomes a reality, and we are optimistic that it will happen this session because the vote was so strong in the House. 50% of the revenue from the new casino in Orange County would be dedicated for the county to decide how they would utilize. 30% of the portion would be spread amongst the cities and towns in Du Bois County, and the other 20% would be dedicated to the Du Bois County Museum.
Now, why are you guys up in the legislature telling us how we should spend the money that we're going to get from you all?
Well,
Don't you think we're smart enough to do that on our own?
do we just give it all to the county and shut Bill Smith and others out, or how do you want us to do that?
We're not talking about Bill Schmidt. We're talking about now. What did you do in the other 2 counties? Did you tell them how to spend their money in the other 2 counties?
I can't. I don't know how.
Well, how come you discriminate against us, telling us how to spend our money you did in the other 2 counties?
There are very prescribed limits for Orange County.
That's true.
Rich.
Yeah, it's broke up between
They
West
got
Baden
that
and
broken up of 20 different ways for Orange County. Now Crawford County would have it all going to the county government.
I mean, if you don't like that, we can change it. It's a
sure
working
as hell
progress.
don't.
I personally don't either. It seems like us county officials could decide how we spread our, how we spend that money.
One thing that we did want to make sure, and I'll jump in here, we wanted to make sure that the cities and the towns were addressed. Because you have large populations of Du Bois County living in cities or towns. So
They
that's
also live in the county.
true.
So the county gets the money, they get a part of it. Bill Schmidt's always after us for this and that and that and this.
No.
We were trying to make it.
Let me jump in here. I like their idea because you don't always give it to it, Chris.
We were trying to
Relief team is coming.
We were trying to make your job easier, Rich. So
You're not. Again, I just hate to see you guys telling us how to spend our money all the time. You want to give us something, you want to tell us how to spend it.
well, at least we're sending you money without just an unfunded mandate.
We ain't got it yet.
That's true. Yeah, don't spend it yet. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I would like to just comment on the bill itself, and I'm not that familiar with what the situation was with the changes in the distribution in Du Bois County, but this year I filed a very similar bill to the one that passed the House of Representatives in the Senate with the two differences, but the main difference was that Crawford County and Du Bois County would receive the same amount of money that Orange County received, which I felt was the intent of the license that was given to Patoka Lake. And this license is going to be transferred, but I think the counties that were to benefit should benefit equally as they would have under the original legislation. That bill did not get a hearing, but the reason it didn't get a hearing, it was assigned to the Rules Committee, and that was because the Supreme Court, I believe it was in late December, early January, ruled that the state legislature could not pass special legislation. And they based that on the Constitution that does have an article and a section that says you cannot pass special legislation. And it lists a number of things that you cannot pass special legislation for. Casino gaming was not one of those, and riverboat gaming. But it had a list, and then it says, for all other things where general legislation can apply, it should apply as opposed to special legislation. But the Supreme Court in its ruling went on to say that if special legislation were necessary, and you spelled it out in the bill, then that would be acceptable. And we're working on trying to get language that will do that. And I believe that the bill that came from the House does have that language in it. They amended it in committee to try to address those constitutional concerns. The legislation I drafted and the legislation that Representative Denbo had, they were both drafted before the Supreme Court ruling. So we are trying to find language that will be acceptable. Senator Garton has been very hard-nosed about it. He said that it must be constitutional. It can't be special legislation. So we're looking at, and he has been willing to discuss it with us and try to help find ways to assure that it will meet the constitutional requirements. So I think there is some effort there on his part. He says he's opposed to the bill, but he's willing to work with us to try to make it constitutional.
I just want to talk just a little bit about Senate Bill 35. I understand it passed and will be headed for the House. This is a bill that would increase the tort liability against communities, cities, towns, and counties, and increase it up to $1 million maybe by 2007. Right now it's at $300,000. As we talked earlier about the lack of funding at this point in time, where we're at in the world, this to me is another unfunded mandate that is going to be coming down to us and cost us in the long run, because as soon as you're talking about letting the cap on the liability claims increase, you know you have insurance companies out there that are increasing your premiums, plus it gives an incentive for people to go out and to file lawsuits, because oftentimes in lawsuits, the real cause is skimmed over the top, and it goes directly towards the deep pockets, which are city and county. So as it approaches the House, I would appreciate you voting no on this Senate Bill 35.
Well, I'd just like to comment on that bill. There's a couple of things. First of all, I don't view this as an unfunded mandate.
Well, maybe not unfunded mandate.
And the reason, let me explain why. Because if the state legislature had not passed legislation that put the cap in there in the first place, you wouldn't have any kind of a cap for any type of protection. And so it's a state law that set a cap for counties, and that cap was set back in, I think, 77. And $300,000 in 1977 was worth a lot more than $300,000 today. I might ask you, what is your current liability insurance? What amount do you have for the city?
I would have to look at that, but
well, I checked with some of the people with cities and towns, and with the Association of Counties, and almost every city and town and every county in the state has at least $1 million worth of coverage today. So if the insurance companies raise your rates as a result of that cap being raised, then they're just sticking it to you because you're already paying for it, and you've got a cap. They're not giving you a benefit of that cap in the rates. You're paying for $1 million worth of coverage. Most counties and cities have $1 million or more in coverage. So if the insurance companies increase your rates, first of all, they're ripping you off because you're already paying for it. And secondly, if a member of your family were to be killed or injured by a truck from Kimball, and the medical cost and the cost to you and the loss of income for your family member, whether it's your son, your daughter, or whoever, if that were over $300,000, wouldn't you expect Kimball's insurance to pay for whatever it is? And would that loss of that loved one or their ability to earn that livelihood, wouldn't that be just important to you if it had been a county truck or a city vehicle that caused the accident? So I just think that what we're looking at here is trying to provide for those individuals who are injured coverage, and we've got this artificial cap that was set back in 1977 that under this legislation simply raises that to what's a little more realistic value today.
okay, on the surface that all sounds wonderful, but you have to look a little bit deeper than that, and you use the example of Kimball. Let's just say it's Mr. A truck driver who doesn't have that amount of coverage, and the first thing they come after is the cities because there was gravel on the road or the stop sign was faded and all those things. So when you're targeting a specific group that is funded by taxpayers that's going to end up paying this in the long run, I think you need to be very, very cautious on how you just look at that and say it's okay because it hasn't been raised since 77. I understand there's only 20 other states that have a higher cap than what Indiana has at this time. So at this time, what I'm saying is that when we are very tight on our local budgets here, please don't do anything that's going to increase the cost of spending that we have to do here locally.
Well, we did maintain a cap, and it should be below what you're already insured for.
Mayor, we're looking for Senate bills to kill all the time. I'll keep your thoughts in mind.
Can I just touch back on the gambling bill?
Sure.
Regardless of how the guys split up the money, if that would ever happen. Do I hear that the new bill is a smaller percentage than was originally estimated for DuBois County when Dennis worked on it?
That is my understanding, yes, from what was proposed last year.
Not in Linda's bill, but in
in my bill, I made the percentages the same, but I'm going to have to look into that, and I don't know, maybe some of the members in the House can answer this, but the original bill was based on a percentage of the boarding fee. $1 of the boarding fee, and there was a $3 boarding fee. $1 of the boarding fee was to be split 3 ways equally between 3 counties. Now, I don't know how much money that was supposed to bring in. And I'm not sure, but this bill, I don't believe, is based on a boarding fee. Perhaps the 4 or 5%, whatever it is, that goes to Du Bois County and Crawford County would be the equivalent of what you would have received under that boarding fee. I'm not sure. So I'm going to have to look at that before I can criticize it and say that you're not getting the same amount you would have under the original bill. But if that's the case, that it has been cut, then I'm going to be working to try to get that level back up for both Du Bois and Crawford
And
County.
don't let those guys find it out.
Yeah, then
Senator, he was exactly right, and I don't mean to cut you off a little bit. The way that bill was done originally, Dan, things have changed since what we did in the special session and what we did with the existing riverboats. So really, we're not comparing apples to apples anymore. And basically, the amount we're going to work to ensure that the end result is approximately the same as the original intent. But the process has changed in determining what that end result is going to be. And that's what we've got to do. That's what we've got to work out between now and the end of session.
Orange County under this bill and under virtually and even under my bill would have received substantially more money than Du Bois and Crawford County, because we have changed the way the whole system would operate for this particular gaming industry that would be located in Orange County. The revenues would be going into an historic district to help maintain, and I understand operation expenses were removed from this, so it's just strictly for the maintenance of those 2 historic structures over there, the West Baden Springs Resort and the French Lick Hotel, both of which are in sad need of money to be able to continue to maintain them. With the French Lick Springs Hotel ranging from 11 to 35% capacity, they can't operate very long under those capacities. We have to do something. A hotel, as I understand it, really needs to be operating up around 65% or above in order to stay in existence. And they've been prodding along over there
10-20.
with just 10 to 35%, and they just can't keep it open at that. So we've got to do something. The Astar in Evansville, and it just really fries me that those people are down there fighting this bill, and they're saying you need to have a restriction on how many gaming places you can have in French Lick West Baden because they don't want the competition. Well, the competition that French Lick West Baden is getting now, drawing conventions to Evansville and to Harrison County and other parts along the Ohio River, that is what is taking the convention traffic from French Lick West Baden and virtually destroying that community. So we've got to do something.
Orange County got hit with the double whammy, so to speak. They didn't get the boats.
No.
Plus, Lyndall's exactly right. They've seen the occupancy at their hotel go way down because these things are going to Evansville and they're going to Caesars. So it's been a double hit for French Lick.
And they don't share revenue either with contiguous counties.
Right. Astar.
Not at all.
Not at all.
But up the river they do.
Yeah.
That was part of when they did the referendum, I believe, that they agreed to do that. It's not mandatory. They agreed to do that.
Right.
Jane had a question.
If Medicaid has been flatlined or leveled, I recently heard Melanie Bella speak, and the biggest expense in Medicaid is nursing home beds. They're paying 2 out of every 3 nursing home beds in the state of Indiana. It's the largest chunk of money in the Medicaid budget in the state of Indiana. If that's gonna level, people are gonna have to be taken care of at home then, right? In order to get some care taken care of, because you're gonna have to put them in a less expensive place. Are we set up to do that? And are we prepared for that? Because it's putting a lot more responsibilities back on families, and you certainly can't legislate people to take care of their families. You certainly can't legislate adults from divesting their income to their children so they can go into a nursing home at the expense of government, which is happening in this county all the time. So somewhere along the line, this system is kind of driving a whole different network of circumstances going on, and I guess I have a lot of concern about Medicaid because it's adult-driven. It's not children and low-income families driven. It's adult-driven. So how are we dealing with that problem if we're going to flatline it too?
It's the most difficult question that might be presented here today. Medicaid, the escalation of Medicaid left unaddressed by the legislature was double digits and increasing far more than any other thing that the state paid that we're required to maintain that. And every budget in virtually every department was flatlined, and many of those with a 7% cut that the governor implemented for many of those last year. They've got less money in this new budget than they had in the last budget, if you will. And Medicaid had the increases that were allowed. And just like we did with the Department of Corrections, we'd get a mixed bag. It depends who was doing the talking. Should we build a new prison and spend $800 million? The answer would probably be no. Should we let 2,000 criminals out of prison? The answer would probably be no. And we have to find that fine line so that we can save dollars over here. I'm going to get back to your Medicaid question on the Department of Corrections, and then what do we do with these additional prisoners, because we're not any tougher on crime than other states. We're looking for alternative things to do for nonviolent offenders, where the different types of incarceration that they will be paying for themselves rather than tax people paying for. Going back to Medicaid, is the growth of the Medicaid, it's flatlined is what it is, and if there's an anticipation of an 8 or 10% increase, I suspect it might be that it's going to be doing like the other departments, and it's really sad to do. Those are the least fortunate of our society because they rely on tax dollars for their elderly care and the folks that don't have the insurance. But that flatlining hadn't occurred there on the Medicaid, and it was a huge issue. The alternative to that is we're going to have to raise taxes to fund Medicaid, pure and simple. We took those two issues and said, nope, we're flatlining. You're not going to get this 15% increase. And I think that was Department of Corrections was fairly high. And we did the same thing with Medicaid. To say, this is what you're going to have to crunch down within that department and try to make it fit. And on the nursing home, what a mess. We got so many nursing homes that have empty beds that drive up the cost of the beds in the nursing home. That industry says they can't make it, and I don't know if it's correct or incorrect. They wanted a bed tax. It didn't happen this time. It didn't happen in the legislature. They wanted a bed tax to prop up the difference of a cost in a Medicaid at $6 a bed. It would apply to nonprofit nursing homes. Nonprofits in the federal statutes say it has to apply to all nursing homes if you do a bed tax, and it didn't happen in the House. I don't know the answer. I wish I could give you an answer to the questions. It's a serious problem, but I know that Medicaid and FSSA are having, you can call it cuts or flatline, but it's cuts because the percentages to go up. Difficult decisions they'll make, just like the Department of Transportation, Department of Administration, Department of Corrections, and all the other departments are facing as well with less money. And the alternative is, and if this group here was symbolic of the state and it's like, okay, raise my income taxes, and some of you would say that's fine if we can provide these services, if it's for education or if it's for Medicaid or whatever, we're happy to look at those solutions. The alternative, and unless somebody at this table tells me differently, it's raise taxes, pure and simple. And there's two taxes that we would raise. It'd be sales tax or we'd be raising income tax. That's the equation. I can't address it any better.
Representative Stillwell, is there a commission at the state that will keep someone from building a new nursing home then? Since we're basically overbedded in nursing homes and have been for 20, 25 years. We don't need any more nursing home beds. Is there a restriction that will also go into place to keep a facility from being built? Because right now we don't need any more. This county is filled the capacity with empty rooms. The other part of this has to go in place, and somebody has to be willing to say there is no need.
Even when you look at 150 legislators, and I know these folks up here very well, and you look at sympathetic and even voting for things that cost money in the past on those folks that you're so concerned about. I suspect we rank in the real high part of having those same concerns. I mean, I truly do. Even at risk of some folks don't think you should do that because we're extremely sympathetic to that. We're going to have to see what sorts out. This will be reviewed. This is a 2-year budget, but it's going to be reviewed again in next year if there's adjustments we can make if our economy improves. It's so difficult. Indiana people don't think it's like you guys spend so much money, and we're the custodians of that. But our state ranks 47th in the nation on per capita spending across the board. That's what we rank. We are a low-cost state, and when you're a low-cost state like we are, and the governor through many programs, including what we did in the House, we whacked off about $900 million when we're one of the lowest per capitas in the country on what we spend overall, including education. Education is somewhere in the national average range, and of course we were woefully behind several years ago, and we got to where we thought we needed to be. You raise taxes or you flatline programs, and that's the issue. I've not got any correspondence to raise the taxes, although some say it's okay if you raise it for things I'm interested in. It's a difficult equation. I don't have an answer for you. If someone does, jump into the debate here.
I would like to just ask for a show of hands for anyone in here, maybe all of you could explain to me what tax cuts you got in 1999 when we reduced your taxes and used that $2 billion surplus to help reduce your taxes. Let's see a show of hands of those who could explain where your taxes were cut.
Auto excise tax.
No, that was before that.
That wasn't. Nope.
That was before that.
Mobile homes.
There you go.
Mobile homes was part of it, yes.
Yeah, and that was unintended. It was a drafting error.
That was part of it, yes.
What are your many of their nowadays?
Inventory tax.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. Yeah.
Your counting errors too.
Did you have something you wanted to say?
That was actually in the special session.
That's correct.
The 1999 tax.
Yes, at one time there was a provision in state law, you could not build an extra
Right.
room.
Right.
I want you to know that.
Right, I knew,
And
Dennis, there was.
There was a senator by the name of Miller that changed it.
Pat?
No,
Pat Miller?
a man.
Oh, okay, good. My concern is everybody is complaining about Medicaid and taxes that go to pay for Medicaid. Yet we have, and I'm sorry, I'm not gonna mention a name, but we have an individual who goes on a radio program and helps people divert their income to their children legally, so they can go into the nursing home at the expense of government. That's not that. Talk about morals and ethics. That's not ethical. That's not moral. I'm sorry, but somewhere along the line, we can't have everything we want unless we're willing to take some rules on the other end of this. And
Well, I think that the way the House addressed corrections and to reduce the spending in corrections, I think was the right way to go. We need to find ways to take care of the nonviolent offenses in some way different than just locking them up in jail, because we have the jails bursting at the seams and having to build new jails, and it's terribly expensive. The average cost for inmates is $25,500 per year per inmate. That is a tremendous cost to the state. And the more we can put it, we pass laws every day. If the Senate's done anything this year, it's create more felonies and increase time for felonies that were already on the books, and at the same time we have established more mandatory sentences, so even the judges don't have the opportunity to find other ways of handling these people.
Well, we have good in-home care programs. That's what should be used. People shouldn't go into a more expensive facility, but that takes somebody to make a decision and a statement that this is the way you go. And soon, all of us in the room have to bite the bullet and say we all have a portion in this. It's not somebody else's job to straighten this out. It's ours.
What you described is occurring all the time, and that has led to a significant increase in Medicaid funding. Absolutely.
Take a look at this county's data. One of the richest counties in the state, price per capita income, highest people on nursing homes.
Russ, you was talking about expensive jails. we commissioners here in the county just opened up a work release building where they pay to stay. They pay the county to stay there, and they pay their own health care, meals. We were smart enough to do that, but then you go back and look at this, and we're getting back to this casino riverboat again. But then you look at that and you say Crawford County is smart enough to know how to share their money when they get in, but Du Bois County's not. You're basically telling us, almost like a slap in the face, that no, you're going to tell Du Bois County we got to give so much to the museum and the cities and towns, but Crawford County, they understand. They know how to share theirs. I don't. It's almost like a slap in the face to the county officials here in Du Bois County. I think that needs to be changed.
You're suggesting that needs to be changed, obviously.
Right. If Crawford County can understand and share theirs as they see fit, I think Du Bois County should have the right to do the same.
Let me ask you this. Is that in that distribution, should it all go to the counties, or should cities and towns get a pro-racial share based on population?
Well, I don't have no problem with sharing with. We get along fine with the mayor and the cities here in the county.
So you're against the museum funding, then, is what you're saying?
No, but we ought to be able to say how much we give to the museum. I mean, or else tell Crawford County to do the same. I mean, you're saying like Crawford County, like their county officials are smart enough to, you know what I'm saying? And here in Du Bois County, we got to tell them where to put the money. And yet we were smart enough to understand about the jail situation. We got it. We just cut the ribbon on a work release building, and it's been a positive thing in this county.
You're discriminating against our intelligence.
Very well put.
You're trying to tell us how to spend our money.
Right.
We don't agree with that whatsoever. And I think there's the cause of it, no, there's the other cause of it.
Brad?
I have nothing.
Senator?
No, we're here.
Senator, you got my curiosity up. What 1999 taxes are you wanting to consider raising?
Well, one of the things that we did in 1999 that is a long-term reduction in revenues to the state was to increase the deductions that you have on your income tax. We raised that deduction that you have, the individual deduction. Most people had no idea we did it. Now, what that means in total revenue, I don't know. The other one is, and I don't want to necessarily change all of these, but I want people to understand where the money went and why we're in this situation. Another one that was a big a decrease in our income tax revenue was the property tax add-back. Now, I was very much in favor, and have been for a long time, in eliminating that property tax add-back. And what that meant was, on your federal income tax, you were able to reduce your federal income tax for taxes paid, and one of those you pay is your property tax. And then that reduced the taxes coming to the state of Indiana. So Indiana at one time, or prior to 1999, said, okay, go take that money that you took off of your federal tax as property tax, add that back onto your income, and then you pay taxes on that. We eliminated that, and those two things are long-term reductions in revenue on income tax that has helped us get into this situation.
If you want to know where the money went, leave me your name and address, and I'll mail it to you. I got a 15-second drill. It's like homestead credit, $381 million. That's homeowners. They didn't know it, but it was $381 million personal property. Inventory tax, we hear inventory all the time. $321 million property tax deduction, $111. Dependent child exemption, people who have families, $232 million. Low income tax credit, $63 million. Inheritance tax cut, $59 million. Renters deduction, $22 million. State add back, $174 million. Income tax cuts for seniors, $18 million. Unemployment tax cut, $108 million. Then three investments. Additional funding for roads and streets went to the local level. $300 million one-time expenditure. Reduction in unfunded pension liability. What we put in there now, say the center feature, $300 million and $172 million. There it is, $2.2 billion. That's where it went. And all those were very popular when we did that, and the economy went south, literally. And that's what happened. They were very popular. Number one question that we got when we had that big surplus up there give us our money back. I mean, that was like it was universal. It was probably 90 percentile. Give us our money back, and we tried to distribute that back in a fair and concise way. And it went to counties, it went to cities, it went to seniors, it went to people who had kids, it went to education, and it was probably done pretty fair. And this state, we're fairly conservative, and we have a Democrat House and a Republican Senate, and just by the nature of that, the compromise is probably going to take into account most people's concerns. So that's where the money went. And if you want it, I'll send you a copy if you give me your name and address.
He's reading from a mailer that most of you may have received. You know,
we tried to get this information out, but we always...
Gentlemen, where are we with the reassessment on a statewide basis? Because that's going to have a tremendous impact for all levels of local government. If those tax statements are not out on time and there's not a distribution to the local taxing units, then that becomes a tax increase, because the interest that we're going to have to pay on the money that we're going to have to borrow for operating is going to come out of our debt service accounts for schools, and in essence that's going to be a tax increase. And so where are we on a statewide
Well, there's no
basis?
delay in reassessment that's being mandated by the legislature, which has been talked about, as you know, for 2 or 3 years. So we had a handout given to us recently showing us how the various counties are doing. Some are in great shape, some are not. So I think depending on
Actually, I
what
think Du Bois County's in pretty good shape as far as reassessment is concerned, and they're going to be ready, I think, to mail out their billings. So I think Du Bois County's okay.
Lake's in trouble. There's a couple dozen others are.
There's 30 some odd, 35, I think.
But we're going to proceed with it as scheduled.
Right now.
The legislature will not delay reassessment, and there was question if, in fact, we attempted to do that, if the court would find that even in violation of the Constitution. But we kind of took our time when they did that, and we thought about it. I, for one, thought it was not a bad idea to delay reassessment for a year. 40% of the county is not going to be able to get their work done on time, and they're going to have the fall taxes coming in. People's going to say, my God, my property taxes went up a lot, because you're going to be paying a double whammy in the fall because they're not going to go out in time, or you may get those in August. But politically and constitutionally, it wasn't possible to do that. It would have been an easy way to fix a temporary gap because of a huge economic downturn, the worst in 50 years. But we didn't do it because of a lot of legal concerns. And reassessment's coming along, and you're right, you'll have to, some entities will have to temporarily borrow money in some counties if those tax statements don't go out, and it's going to be a bunch of them, probably 40% or more of those spring statements won't come out on time.
A delay was briefly discussed in the House at the beginning of the session. Obviously, there wasn't support in the House to do it. It's not been a part of any bill, or certainly not been a part of the budget. And I think the support in the Senate would be far less than that of the House. So, no delay.
Yeah, I have a question back here.
Jim W. with Perry Spencer Telephone, and questions on House Bill 1627. I know it passed the House, but I'd still maybe like to get some closing remarks maybe from some of the House members, and if there's any early indications of where this might be going.
Well, if you want my opinion, I hope it's going nowhere. I think that's a terrible piece of legislation. I think it's very anti-consumer, and I think it goes against everything that was passed in the federal legislation in 1996 to try to create a competitive local phone exchange environment. This bill that he's talking about is being promoted by SBC, and some of the local phone companies are behind it as well, but they definitely have taken the lead on this, and they're doing this in other states as well. They're complaining that what they're forced to charge for their network lines to competitors, they claim is below their actual cost, even though I've seen that this same company is offering these lines out on the retail market for about the same money, and I can't believe if it was 40% below their cost, they wouldn't be offering this to their normal customers at that 40% loss. It's a very controversial bill. The bottom line to that, I believe, is that it's a very complex issue, too complex for a citizen legislature to deal with, and I think that's some of the intent behind the legislation, is to try to bypass the federal requirements as well as what the State Utility Regulatory Commission has already done to try to help put competition in place in this state, which I think is positive. But obviously if you're SBC and you're trying to figure out a way to block competition when the whole deal that was cut ahead of time years ago was to let this happen so companies like SBC and other local phone companies could get into the long-distance business. Well, now they've got that coming eventually, but they want to be able to go back to the monopoly environment and have their cake and eat it too, and I think it's wrong, and I hope the bill dies.
Well,
Go ahead.
I think some of us have been involved in it and kind of understand what this issue is about. Some may not, so I'd like to just sort of give an analogy. Let's say that WITZ had the capability of broadcasting two signals simultaneously. And they have they've got the tower, they've got all of the equipment in the radio station, and they've got all of the people to maintain that equipment. And the FCC says, WITZ, you have to let's say Dan Mundy, come in and start his radio station. And you have to provide all of that equipment, all of that service, all of your people have to be devoted to providing that service to Dan Mundy, who's going to start his new radio station. Dan Mundy, we're going to tell you, the FCC is going to tell you what you're going to have to pay for that service. Now, is it going to cover all the cost? Well, it may cover the cost for the very time being, but what about future costs? And it doesn't take that into consideration. So, Dan Mundy goes to WITZ and says, I'm going to start my radio station, I'm going to pay you this amount, and it's below the cost it costs that radio station to operate. So, they go, Dan goes out, and he sells advertising on his radio station that basically he's not invested anything into. He could go out of business tomorrow, he could leave it, get up and leave, he's not losing a thing because he doesn't have any personnel, he doesn't have the equipment, he doesn't have the tower, and so he is able then to sell his advertising to the same people WITZ's been selling to, but he can do it at a lower rate. Now, is that fair? And I think that's what this bill is about.
Well, wasn't that the federal wasn't that the United States Telecom Act? What that was supposed to do anyway?
Not only that, but what I think that this is the SBC message that you just heard from my good friend Senator Hume. But let me point out that the network that Ameritech or SBC now, somehow they're an Indiana company, but as far as I'm concerned, they're from Texas. Okay. That network was built by rate of return dollars. They were given a monopoly, and the state basically allowed them to build that network on guaranteed rate of return dollars. So in my opinion, opening up that network to competitors when they had basically a guaranteed amount of money coming in to help build that network, I don't see as wrong to allow leasing of that network at a fair rate. The question is whether or not what the IURC has said is fair or not. And the IURC has agreed to even review it and figure out a way, if there's more evidence that the phone companies need to bring in, that they might reevaluate it. And the companies have said, heck with that, we're going to bypass the utility commission. Let's just go right to the legislature and get them to come in and micromanage this process. We're not qualified to micromanage this process.
Let me add, and I'll be happy to stay here all morning. We spent on the House floor after this was debated, and for all sorts of billionaires fighting billionaires of companies. I mean, was the big issue. It really was. We spent 3 hours on the House floor arguing this same issue, literally, and it was very divisive. And it wasn't bipartisan. I mean, it was bipartisanly divisive. We had people in our caucus that disagreed on the issue. So anyway, we spent 3.5 hours debating this after we talked about it for about a month.
We could debate it for 3 days, and we still wouldn't have all the facts.
Since I'm buying a radio station,
and by the way,
not buying a radio station, but what brings this up here in Du Bois County is a complete lack of broadband communications. We're very concerned about it. Our businesses do not have broadband communications. The biggies, the Ameritechs, the Verizons are not providing the services that we want.
Well, the feds just gave them protection this last week.
We have been fighting them for years to get the services that they have in Evansville, that they have in Princeton, that they have in Louisville, they have in other bigger cities. We need broadband communications to be able to compete for economic development. We need these services. We also need the services to our communities, to our residents. Now, the cable TV companies, the telephone companies are not providing these services. We have been working on this for a couple of years. In order to get this, we're going to have to get some people in that are going to be able to offer these services, and we don't want them to be able to come in and then the big companies come in and say, hey, through this win-back situation, we can drive those people back out of business and then take us back to the level of service we had before. I don't understand the regulations, the restrictions that all of you talk about technically, but I do know that the businesses and the communities in Du Bois County are underserved by the Ameritechs and the Verizons, and we need to do something about that.
If I could just say, I think our companies at Perry Spencer are good ones to look at how we look at House Bill 1627. People always ask me, we're a regulated phone company, just like Ameritech, but we also have a deregulated subsidiary that's branching out and doing things in throughout Du Bois County, Spencer, and Perry County. So if I wake up and I do have my ILEC, my incumbent telephone hat on, I love this legislation because it's protectionist in some ways. There's some fairness to it. I cannot speak as far as are they really truly reselling their service at a loss. I wish everybody luck in trying to figure out, because I know how the numbers work in our industry, and to truly figure out if they're making money or losing money is not going to be easy. But the issue on broadband, I like from the legislation. If other companies are building out broadband networks and it is not regulated, why cannot the incumbent version of broadband being built out be not regulated as well? I think a good not a fix, but a good answer to this is to incent these large companies, the RBOS, to see if they truly would do it. If you would make it deregulated, if you would make that network not if they build out broadband where no one else can get on, just like some of the others, let's just see if they will come and if they will build. Now I'm putting on my CLEC hat, and this is where the ILEC. I'm not worried about people. There's not too many companies coming in to compete in Lamar, Indiana, or Derby, Indiana, or Stendhal. It's just not happening. But from a CLEC standpoint, where our company's growth is going to occur, it does scare us from the standpoint, if we come up into these communities and we start investing dollars, big dollars, to bring broadband to these communities, because I truly believe it's going to be local companies like us that have the leadership to do it. This is what scares me about that win-back. Look through it. It does. It says, notwithstanding any other statute, there's preferential discriminating pricing things throughout the utility code that they cannot do it. Win-back goes totally against that grain. If we were to come into these areas, the Ameritechs and to Jasper, and do things, what is to prevent these companies with that win-back provisioning from saying, we're tired of losing customers, here's our pricing. To the customers they start losing, we'll give it away for free, we'll give it away. Our studies are based on penetration rates and how much customers we can capture. And if that's to be where they can have that flexibility in doing that, that is not incentive for local companies such as ourselves to come in here and do it. That's my biggest fear that's why I say level the playing field. If they want to make broadband deregulated, let's see if the big companies, with that said, let's see if the big companies will come and serve even the larger communities like a Jasper and so forth, if that's what they're after. But do not make it unfair to where companies like ourselves who are come in and might invest millions into these communities, that we're going to have to fight the large companies that aren't doing anything to develop, but to keep that customer, they're going to be dropping that price where the customer says, I can't leave you if I'm going to get my service for that price.
You are aware what the FCC did last week when it came to that portion of the federal regulation.
Did they not? And I know here in the state, I think they asked for further increases in the discounting of the unis, of the unbundled networks, but didn't they not say something about broadband?
Yeah, the broadband, Ameritech will have protection on upgrading their network, so the incumbent phone company will now have an exclusive when it comes to not having to provide that access to the competitive people that are in the marketplace when it comes to broadband.
But in the state, didn't the IURC just rule, though?
Right.
Didn't they just rule, though, that they will have DSL services and they will open that up for resale?
Well, there was an issue in Evansville where they have broadband with Ameritech, and they wanted to expand out, and I don't understand the technological approach, but they wanted to expand out a 2-mile radius to take their broader band. And they were going to put some equipment in and make a huge investment and put the equipment in And the IURC says when you put this in, no, you've got to put different types and additional equipment in, so when the competitors want to come down, tap onto your investment so they can jump in and do the broadband. And Ameritech says, God, we'll lose money. We can't. This is a big investment to tap out a 2-mile radius, and at some point it would expand out again. And then they allow their competitors to come in. They had to spend additional money so the competitors could come in with no investment to do that. And they said, we're not going to do it. So, I mean,
You just shut them off.
Davey's not wrong and he's not right. I hope I'm not wrong. I'm not right. We disagree on some. We agree on some parts of the bill, perhaps, maybe not. But we disagree on many parts of the bill on what's in the best interest of consumers and how we're going to get these technologies to folks that live in rural areas. I mean, my district's rural. Davey's district is rural.
Well, the broadband environment today is not fair, because the companies like Insight and the other companies that are outside of the regulatory control of IURC, they are able to run broadband anywhere and everywhere they want to, and they're not regulated. That's currently the way the situation is. The way the IURC's ruling a couple of weeks ago said that if SBC, which is a regulated company, wanted to expand theirs, they had to do it in such a way that competitors could hook on. Insight and other broadband companies don't have to do that. And yours wouldn't either. Your sub-company would.
Yeah, and that's what I always hear is the build out of broadband. So if the focus is anywhere, if it's, I agree with what Russ is saying, that if they're putting all these millions of dollars in to put this equipment together, and then they're having to share it or to resell it at a discount and so forth, where's the incentive? Let's deregulate broadband for everyone. Level the playing field. We could compete because the dollars would be the same to get to these communities with broadband. But let's see who truly will bring broadband to these communities. Don't make it, though. Do not make it where then it becomes protected. If a company like ours does it, that the incumbent still, even though if it's a broadband deregulated and the playing field's even on that, you better get rid of the win back, because you're also giving further incentive not to invest, but hey, don't worry about it, we're protected because we'll just start discounting our service, or we'll give it away for free to stop our loss of customers.
In the few minutes we've talked about this subject, I mean, this has been 7 years in the works. It's very complicated. And here we've got citizen legislators trying to figure out what's the fairest way to deal with this issue, and we can't handle it. I'm telling you. Most members couldn't help explain this bill in 2 or 3 minutes or more, but they hit the red or green button based on what their gut feeling was on anecdotal information given to them. This is where the regulators have to do their job, and the legislature should let them do their job and let people who know what the hell they're doing make the decisions.
We just have an honest difference of opinion, because we do it every day on complicated issues. The budget. The school formula may be more complicated than the Ameritech bill. For God's sake, I can't explain it to you, and it's billions of dollars, and I vote on it every year. And I doubt anybody at this table could explain it to you. And Superintendent Yost over here is probably as knowledgeable as anybody here, and I'm not sure you could give it to me in a 3-minute drill on the formula either. But we do different things. Anyway, you can see our disagreement on some issues.
I think you guys need to be going.
Linda and I have to be at the Martin County Community Building in 25 minutes, so that's our excuse. I do want to talk to you guys later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anytime. Do we have any other questions for the two who remain?
I'd just like to ask, where do the two of you stand on daylight saving time issue?
I'll just tell you where I stand on that issue, and I've told everyone. If there's a way to make southwestern Indiana on the same time zone with the rest of the state, I don't care if it's central, I don't care if it's daylight, just don't separate our communities down here. The way they propose it now, I'm against it, because Jasper and Spencer County would be on a different time zone 12 months a year instead of 6 months a year. The way it's proposed right now, we'll be out of sync the whole year instead of half a year. That's where I come from. I want unification in Southwest.
See ya.
That has been the daylight savings time issue has been debated. It's been discussed. It's been everything for years and years and years. We all know that.
And Milton's going to keep after you.
Yeah.
One way or another, Milton's going to keep after you.
But keep in mind, all the legislature, all that the Indiana General Assembly can determine is whether...
Which side do we want to be on? I mean, do we want to be on Eastern Daylight Time, or do we want to be on Central? I mean, where is the House on this issue?
And you've touched on the major problem right there. All we can do is determine whether or not we're going to have daylight savings time. Only the federal government can establish time zones. Only the federal government can do that.
That confuses everybody.
Right. The Indiana General Assembly cannot do anything to determine whether or not Indiana is going to be in the Central Time Zone or the Eastern Time Zone.
But you can't suggest.
We can't suggest, absolutely. And that, just based upon the geography of the state of Indiana, it leads to this problem. You've got the western part of the state who want to be on the Central Time Zone. You've got the eastern part of the state who want to be on the Eastern Time Zone. And for that reason, I don't think that this is
right now we're on 3 different time zones.
4.
I mean, well, yeah,
Actually,
I mean,
4.
but I'm talking about, you know, the east, the
Let
central, and the west.
Let me ask you, what would you prefer?
Central or Eastern?
I don't care. I just want to be on something because
you want to be on
in business.
I don't either. I want us all to be on the same time.
I worked in. I had a business in New Salisbury for 6 years, and I used to travel from here to New Salisbury, and I went through Marengo, and the town of Marengo, half the town was on Eastern Daylight Time, and half was on Indiana time.
In English, you have a drugstore sitting right beside a grocery store. The drugstore is on fast time. The grocery store is on slow time. I mean, that's
St. Meinrad.
Yeah.
Post office is on Central Time, and the rest of the community is on.
My son has 2 clocks in his one room.
I had a proposal to fix this for Indiana, and everyone thought it was foolish. I was going to put the whole state on the half-hour time. I just thought that might settle it.
But I mean, we're trying to build tourism. We're trying to draw industry into the state. And how can you do it? I mean, tourism just
this will never be resolved in Indiana. Never be resolved. Lake County, Northwest Indiana will always stay with Chicago. They will always vote in Chicago. You got the Eastern, Louisville, and Cincinnati, huge population. They will always go with Eastern. You got Southwest Indiana, Evansville, where sometimes I think the tail wags the dog when Illinois and Indiana, after federal hearings, they come in on these meetings and say, oh, we're going to stay on our time zone, so the tail wags the dog there. And then you got Indianapolis, and I'm not really sure they care. They just want one time zone. It's unresolvable. If someone could resolve that issue, bring it to us. Yeah, I don't know how you resolve it.
I would love to see it.
It's got. I mean, it's terrible. The further south that you go in Du Bois County, the worse it gets. I would suspect it's painful it's painful for me. Half my district's on one time zone, half's on another time zone, and that portion in the middle on a 25, I don't know what time zone they're in because they observe both time zones. The only good thing about it, I can do 2 8 o'clock breakfasts at the same time.
This broadcast of the Jasper Chamber of Commerce Legislative Breakfast, held on March 1st, 2003, is brought to you by Hettinger Beverage Distribution. And by Perry Spencer Communications Incorporated. Long distance and internet from the people you know.